So let's talk about endometriosis. For a lot of people, it's a condition they connect with things like pain or fertility struggles. But what if I told you that this really common, non-cancerous condition has a scientifically proven link to a specific type of cancer? Today, we're going to unpack that surprising connection between endometriosis and ovarian cancer.
This really matters because endometriosis is so common. We're talking about up to 1 in 10 premenopausal women. That is a huge number of people navigating this complex condition day in and day out.
Okay, so that leads us to the big question here, right? What exactly is this link? How serious is the risk really? And what is the absolute latest science telling us about it?
All right, let's dive in. First, we'll cover the connection itself, which is pretty surprising. Then, and this is super important, we're going to put the risk into perspective. From there, we'll explore the science of why this happens, check out some evidence-based ways you can reduce that risk, and then we'll finish up by looking at the future of treatment and what the overall outlook is. All right, first things first, let's actually establish this connection. Now, even though we think of endometriosis as a benign, non-cancerous condition, its link to what's called epithelial ovarian cancer is now a recognized medical fact.
But to be really clear, we're not talking about all ovarian cancers. The link is with very specific subtypes. The main ones are endometrioid and clear cell carcinomas. These are cancers that basically pop up from the surface tissue of the ovary, and together they've got a name: endometriosis-associated ovarian cancer, or EAOC for short.
And hey, this is not a new idea. The possibility was first written about way back in 1925. But for a long, long time, it was just a clinical observation. It's really been in the last decade or so that these massive studies have come out and just solidified everything. They turned what was a hunch into cold, hard scientific fact. Okay, now for what might be the most important part of this whole explainer, putting the risk into perspective. Because look, anytime you hear the words cancer risk, it's scary. So let's really break down what these numbers actually mean. The big headline finding that comes from multiple studies is this: having endometriosis pretty much doubles your background risk of getting these specific ovarian cancers. And yeah, reading that headline, that sounds terrifying. But this chart is where we get the real story. In the general population, the lifetime risk is about 2 in 100. If you have endometriosis, that risk goes up to about 4 in 100. So yeah, the risk is doubled. But let's flip that around. What it really means is that for every 100 women with endometriosis, 96 of them will not develop this cancer. That's the bigger picture here. And it gets even more specific than that. The research is pretty clear that this increased risk is almost entirely tied to one specific type: ovarian endometriosis. That's when the tissue is actually on or inside the ovaries. Other types don't seem to carry that same strong link. Okay, so we've established the what. Now for the why. Why does this link even exist? Let's get into the science and see how we go from just a correlation to a potential cause. Well, scientists think it's kind of like a perfect storm of factors. The main theories point to the environment that endometriosis creates inside the body: an environment of constant inflammation, too much estrogen, and something called oxidative stress, which is basically like a form of cellular rust. All that just creates an environment where cells can get damaged over time, making it easier for cancerous changes to sneak in, especially if some specific gene mutations are already in the mix. Let's zoom in on one specific gene to see how this can happen. It's called ARID1A. Now, you can think of this gene as a tumor suppressor. It's like a bodyguard for your cells. But sometimes a mutation can happen, and this bodyguard gets knocked out. As you can see here, that leads to the loss of a key protein. And suddenly, the cell's own DNA repair crew can't do its job properly. That, right there, is an open invitation for cancerous growth to begin.
So we've got the what and the why. Now let's get to the most practical part. What do we do about it? This is all about the evidence-based strategies that can actually help lower that risk.
Okay, the first thing to get out of the way is this. Right now, there isn't a national screening program for this specific risk group. And I know that might sound wrong, but here's the thing. Trials have actually found that screening doesn't end up saving more lives from this disease. It's a tough reality, and that's exactly why the focus has shifted so heavily to risk reduction. But the good news is there are definitely things that work to reduce that risk. Tubal ligation, getting your tubes tied, actually shows the biggest risk reduction for these specific cancer types. Then you've got combined hormonal contraceptives, like the pill. They're also protective, cutting the risk by up to 27% after 5 years of use. And other options, like the contraceptive injection or a hormonal IUS, have also been shown to significantly lower the risk. All right, let's wrap this up by looking at the outlook. And honestly, this is where the research takes a really surprising and, frankly, hopeful turn. Listen to this. It's a direct quote from the research. It says that having endometriosis is actually associated with a better prognosis. And you might be thinking, how on earth is that possible? Well, it's actually pretty straightforward. It's all about getting diagnosed earlier. The symptoms of endometriosis often mean patients are being watched more closely. So if a cancer does develop, it just gets caught way sooner. And when you look at the numbers, it becomes crystal clear. Because it's typically caught at an earlier stage, the 5-year survival rate for endometriosis-associated ovarian cancer is over 80%. Now, compare that to just under 71% for the same cancers in women who don't have endometriosis. That's a huge difference. And looking ahead, the future looks even brighter. See, now that scientists are zeroing in on those exact molecular pathways, like that ARID1A gene we talked about, they can start building super targeted therapies. Drugs called inhibitors are basically designed to block those specific faulty pathways, and they're already in clinical trials. This is the future, right here, personalized, effective treatments. And that just leaves us with one final, pretty mind-blowing thought. We've gone from a vague hunch 100 years ago to pinpointing the actual genes involved. As we get smarter and smarter about this, it raises this incredible question. Could we one day create a therapy that just stops that transformation from ever happening in the first place? I mean, that's the dream, right? That's the ultimate goal.